Morning, everyone. I'll convene the meeting and start by asking Strategy and Policy Manager John Ridd to do the opening karakia, please.
Morena karakia tata. Tuia ki ranga, tuia ki ralo, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, tuia tata te tangata, ki te kaupapa o te hui nei, ki te kaupapa o te rangi nei, maria ora kia tata kato.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Welcome to the meeting, everyone, and including those on Zoom. So I'll just run through a few reminders and housekeeping. For those on Zoom, the meeting is being recorded and will be available on Council's YouTube channel if relevant. Microphones muted unless speaking and hands up for questions. The location of the toilets is out to the left. Fire exits is through the same doors out to through the main door and assemble at the rear of the Amarudillos complex. And if it's an earthquake, drop, cover and hold. Yeah, anything else will be covered by the public address system. And the media is present, both in the room here, and I'm not sure if anyone's online or not. They potentially could be. Right.
Can you hear me there, Stuart?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, my apologies. I came in with a COVID positive test last night, so I'll sort of do my best to participate as I can. And my video is having some problems and I don't look that great, so I'll just see how I go.
Yep, no, that's fine. Thank you, Mayor Nick. And that, I guess, leads us to apologies. I have apologies from Councillor Mel Courtney and Councillor James Johnson. Are there any others? He is not, and we also have no public forum this morning, as will be. Oh, the apologies. Yes, we do too. Councillor Dowler, you're happy to move the apologies. Seconded by Councillor O'Neill-Stevens. All those in favour will say aye. Against, the resolution is carried. No public forum. Declarations of interest. Appears that there is nil. We do have a late item, in committee late item. We need a mover and a seconder to accept that. Move Councillor O'Neill-Stevens, seconded Councillor Dowler. All those in favour will say aye. Against, the resolution is carried. And then confirmation of minutes of joint Nelson Tasman Regional Transport Committee held Tuesday the 20th of 24 be confirmed as a true and correct record of the meeting. Someone like to move? Move Councillor Dowler, seconded Councillor O'Neill-Stevens. All those in favour will say aye. Against, the resolution is carried. And I think we will move to reports. And as this is the draft regional land transport and draft regional public transport plan hearing, we do have a number of speakers. But before we get to that, John, do you have anything you want to add? The report is on page 4, councillors. And our first speaker is Alan and Gary Stocker, New Zealand Automobile Association. Gentlemen, you're here. Would you like to come up to the table? I think we'll get underway. We are slightly early. And we'll be operating a bell system today, which will ring the first time at 8 and second time at 10 minutes. In that 10 minutes, if you wish to have questions, you then allow a couple of minutes for questions. Unless there's any questions from anyone, I think we're pretty much ready to hear what you have to present to us.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today, and we trust you've all read our submission. I'm Alan Neal. I'm Nelson AA District Councillor and former chairman, and with me is Gary Stocker, and Gary is also a current councillor and a former district chairman, and also Gary is our immediate past president of NZAA. Our NZAA personal membership is now 1.13 million people, actual people nationally, and it's steadily growing. Our Nelson Tasman membership is just over 30,000 personal members. We're not just a car organisation, we have members who are walkers, bikers and public transport users. And you might also be interested to know that AA provides road service for motorbikes and e-bikes and even mobility scooters. We realise also that with the government policy statement 2024 that things in the draft RLTP may need to be changed, and we'll let Gary now talk on some of the AA's general priorities.
Thank you, Alan. Whenever we have an election year, the AA consults quite widely, surveys quite widely with its membership as to what does our membership see as the key issues facing the country. And we published that. This year we ended up with 8 key issues. It's usually around 8 or 10. And we publish that and make sure that all politicians, both central politicians and national politicians and local politicians, are aware of what our membership believes are the key factors out there. As we mentioned in our submission to you, we list the 3 highest priorities from our membership. Resilient roads was the #1 issue for our members. And we realised that in recent times there have been lots and lots of weather events, road closures, we have accidents, but our membership is of the view that we need to make sure that we have a very resilient road transport system to make sure that we maintain maximum usage, efficiency and convenience. And of course, we're all familiar here locally with issues relating to, in the past, Tākeka Hill, and more recently with Pongamoas. Excellent work done with both of those projects in our view with the Transport Agency. But just even locally obviously between Richmond and Nelson, we're having resilience issues there. Road maintenance was the 2nd highest issue. Our members believe that we have a significant asset and it must be maintained even at the cost of new projects. And we believe that that should be the first call on fuel excise duties and road user charges. Safety, as you would imagine, was also a major factor for our members. And the research undertaken by our own research foundation clearly shows that new roads and good quality retrofits, safety retrofits to existing roads significantly improve road safety. So that's, again, a telling point from our members' point of view.
So with regard to local projects, we note that the Hope Bypass is the highest ranked project, and we agree with that priority. We note too that Transport Minister Simeon Brown has indicated that all of the 15 new roads of significance, the ROMs, will be 4-laned and grade separated highways. He also said on the 4th of March this year, referring to the ROMs, that independent analysis has found the construction of 8 new bypasses between January 2009 and December 2016 resulted in up to a 37% reduction in deaths and serious injuries across those roads. And the Ruby Bay bypass on State Highway 60 was part of that research study that was done. We fully support this new project, and we recall that in early stakeholder workshops on the Richmond traffic woes, it was agreed that little improvement could be made until the Hope bypass was in place. Furthermore, in our submission to the Richmond Transport PBC in August 2021, we provided our long-term vision of what State Highway 6 could look like leading to the Hope bypass. And our vision was, and still is, a 4-lane Wakatu Drive and the Richmond deviation with a mini flyover at the Link Road connection to avoid bringing the traffic to a halt. That is still our vision.
From our members' perspective, although we strongly support the Hope bypass, our members are concerned that the Southern Arterial, the missing link, as it's called, between Nelson and Stoke and Richmond, doesn't appear to be given the priority that we believe, our members believe, it should. We believe that the Southern Arterial is a key factor in ensuring that we have a safe, resilient, efficient and cost-effective transport route from the north, the far end of Nelson, right through to the Hope bypass. And we believe that route and the possible redevelopment of state highways, or currently State Highway 6 around the waterfront, are linked together. And we're not supportive of spending significant sums on the waterfront route. We believe that funding would be much better spent on a new road. We have serious concerns about the resilience of the waterfront route, both from the sea, of course, but also the cliff face there. And we've seen that countless times. And the problem that we have in the region here is that we are geographically constrained with hills on one side, water on the other, and we only have two routes, both in the Nelson City end and here in Richmond. So our members are still quite concerned that the Southern Arterial, to some extent, has been shelved for political reasons, but from our members' point of view, we see it as a key factor in making sure that we have an efficient highway network.
So in conclusion, there's so much detail in the draft RLTP, and our submission endeavours to cover some parts of that. We have always valued our relationship with both councils and the Transport Agency, and we appreciate any opportunity to work together and talk together in endeavouring to discuss the views of our membership and, in fact, the reasonable motorist. So thank you for the opportunity.
Alan and Gary, I appreciate that. There is a couple of minute or so for questions if anyone has any. He has not. He must have well covered it, and so thank you for the submission and taking the time to come in and speak to it. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And next speaker is Julian Redd. I don't think she's here. And councillors on her submission is on page 50. I'm sorry I didn't give you the page number for the previous one. I'll try and do that now. Welcome, Julian. So I'm not sure. You have 10 minutes for the submission, including question times. There will be a bell at 8 minutes just to give you a reminder. And if you want to allow us a couple of minutes for questions. So when you're ready, councillors are,
Thank you, Mr.
members
Chair.
are happy to hear your submission.
And kia ora koutou katoa. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Gillian Ratt. I chair the Cycle Trails Trust, and Belinda Crisp, who is our trail manager. While the Trust's primary focus to date has been on the two great rides, the Great Taste Trail and the Coppermine Trail, we do have a broader vision, which is creating great cycle trails for our communities. And this is the rationale behind our submission to the Regional Land Transport Plan. We're really pleased to see the incorporation of improving cycling and walking paths across the region in the draft plan. We also acknowledge the efforts that both councils have already put into improving cycling infrastructure and into the region's two great rides. So there are two aspects that I would like to focus on today, and they would like to see reflected in the RLTP. That's the concept of a Tito Ihu cycle highways and the cycle connectivity between Richmond and Nelson. But first, some context from a report we have recently commissioned from Angus and Associates, a Wellington-based consultancy on the regional benefits of the Great Taste Trail. Our counters clocking up over 400,000 passes in 2023 shows that the trail gets a lot of use. The Great Taste Trail, along with Queenstown and the Hawke's Bay trails, have by far the highest use of any of the great rides around the country. While the largest proportion of users by far are locals, visitor spend is a significant contribution to the local economy, with visitor spend in 2023 estimated by the Angus report at over 34 million. The Great Taste Trail is not just a recreational visitor infrastructure. Those riding over 200 times a year indicates strong commuter use as well. And one of the key messages from an Intercept survey in November, December as part of the Angus work was that locals love the Great Taste Trail. Those are words used in the report by Angus, not our words. So why is this relevant to the Land Transport Plan? The Great Taste Trail is part of our transport system for commuting, recreation and visitors, and it provides the backbone for the Tito Ihu cycle highways concept that we've put forward. Imagine a cycle network that enables people to hop off the ferry in Picton and cycle from Picton to Murchison, and another cycle network from the TDC offices to the Heafy track, providing cycling connectivity for commuters across the region as well. Bikepackers are a growing slow tourism opportunity. For example, the organisers of the Tour Aotearoa, the bikepacking event from Cape Reinga to Bluff that comes through Nelson, Tasman around this time each year, have surveyed riders and estimate they spend on average $200 a day on accommodation and food, a much higher per day spend than a walker staying in a hut or camping on the able Tasman coastal track. We acknowledge the current financial pressures on transport spend, so we're not at this stage pushing for specific funding in the RLTP, but what we would like to see is the concept in the plan, so that the thinking and planning of the transport infrastructure incorporates consideration for opportunities to improve the cycling infrastructure and connectivity across the region and with adjacent regions. This is the concept that's in our submission. We have already presented to the Transport Committee with the Golden Bay Walking and Cycling Group and provided some estimates of the investment that would be required, so I won't go into any further detail here. The other aspect that I wanted to address was the connectivity between Richmond and Nelson, the Wakatu Drive Path and Rocks Road. Both projects are aligned with the priorities for investment in cycling and walking paths in the new draft transport GPS, those 3 bullet points on the slide there. Our particular concern at the moment is that the proposed work by Waka Kotahi to improve the Wakatu Drive shared pathway is looking doubtful. Funding has been identified in a low-risk, low-cost program for several years, and a proposal has been developed for a mix of boardwalk and widened paved pathway between Salisbury Road and towards the Honest Lawyer. The most recent proposal is for 2 short sections to be upgraded by June 2024. A section at Orphanage Creek and a 185-metre boardwalk between Salisbury Road and Saxton Creek. What we are hearing is that the boardwalk section in particular is highly unlikely to happen. It seems there's a perception that getting stakeholder agreement and consenting is nigh on impossible, and that there are concerns as to who would maintain a boardwalk. If nothing is started by June 2024, it's likely the funding will be lost and a whole new process will have to start again for this path. It's a path with a high number of users, commuters and recreational riders. It's an opportunity to showcase the Waimea Estuary to visitors. There are safety issues with the width and condition of the current path, particularly with increasing numbers of e-bikers and its proximity to a very busy highway. It is fortunate there have been no incidents with vehicles hitting the rebound barriers in the vicinity of bikers or riders being taken out by flying objects. It may only be a matter of time. This just quickly shows our counter records on Wakatu Drive. Nearly 167,000 passes in 2023 and a 55% increase in the number of cyclists in the past 5 years. And this shows the daily use profile on that path. So you can see in the left and right hand sides of the graph, that's the commuter peak, 6 to 9 and 4 to 5 on weekdays, and then more of a peak in the middle of the day, and particularly in weekends, which is the 2 peaks in the middle of recreational riding. So, thanks. Oops, back again. So this is what we have and what we could have. On the left, obviously, the current path. You can see the rebound barrier along the left there. What Waka Kotahi can deliver, admittedly with a bit more space to do it in, that's the cycleway between Christchurch and Kaiapoi alongside the motorway. And then on the right is an artist's impression that was provided by WSP of what a boardwalk could look like. And here, considering that there seems to be a reluctance around boardwalks around the estuary, we have already built considerable boardwalks both around the top of the Waimea estuary, and the bottom middle photo is the trail going out to Kaiteri. There's also the boardwalk along from Parkers Road on the back beach. So it is achievable. Rocks Road, our position is that a separated shared pathway is a priority and planning should not be delayed any longer. We acknowledge that full road resilience and a shared pathway, including consenting challenges, is a major task and will take time. Our question is whether combining the footpath and the cycleway on the seaward side of Rocks Road and creating a barrier from vehicles and removing the cycleway against the hill has been given really serious consideration. It does seem like an option that could be done without major reconstruction of the road. We acknowledge that there would be pinch points, but it would certainly be a lot better than what we have now. And maybe it is an opportunity to test some short cantilevered sections, which I have heard discussed around the possibility of putting a shared path along that section. Like the Wakatu Drive pathway, our impression is that these issues seem to be being driven by Waka Kotahi priorities and perceptions of difficulties, not by regional community interests. So our final comments, just again, our vision is to create great cycle trails for our communities, for commuting, recreation and visitors to provide economic, social, cultural and environmental benefits to the region. In particular, we want to see the Tito Iha cycle highways concept incorporated into the RLTP and inclusion in the plan, and pressure on Waka Kotahi to give priority to Wakatu Drive pathway upgrade and a shared pathway on Rocks Road with separation from vehicles. And these should be driven by regional need and priorities and not constantly put on the back burner. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Does anyone have a pressing question? Yes, no. So thank you for coming in and making the submission. I appreciate that and making the time and coming in to speak to it.
Thank you for the opportunity. I hope my message was clear. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Then if we move to Dr. Bruno Lakimi. I'm sure if I got the pronunciation right there, Bruno. So as of councillors, the submission is on page 82. Yes, you do. Just whoever's speaking. And you have 10 minutes, as you've heard me say, the previous speakers, and a bell will ring at 8 minutes to give you an indication. The end is getting near. So when you're ready.
Morena koutou, ihuhu mai nei, I tēnei rā. My name is Elena Meredith, and my role here today as a trustee is to introduce you to the Nelson Tasman Community Transport Trust members, supporters, and our kaupapa, which Bruno Lemke, our trust treasurer, will be covering in more detail shortly. Our trust has received and greatly appreciated support in terms of information, resource, guidance from both TDC and NCC councillors and staff, especially Trindy Walker, David Ogleby, Drew Bryant, Jane Murray, and Margaret Parfitt. We look forward to such ongoing support and resources from both councils in terms of information, funding, staff support, and we understand the importance of our accountability in keeping councillors well informed of and involved in our plans and progress. The Trust is currently updating our strategic plan, which Bruno Lemke will speak to next, outlining the status of current projects and planned future services, such as feeder services from Hera, Butterfly and Rewaka to relevant e-bus connections. Joe Leyland from Tapawera will be outlining to you this afternoon the current progress in developing our bus in Tapawera as a feeder service to Wakefield and Motueka. We as trustees look forward to ongoing cooperation with and support from both councils in terms of funding, information through access to your councillors and relevant staff. Thank you all so much for ensuring that the wheels of the bus do indeed go round and round. And I'll hand you to Bruno Lemke, our Trust Treasurer, for his presentation and your participation. Our submission today will focus only on the Regional Public Transport Plan. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, everyone. Our written submission, which you all have on public transport and only on public transport, states that the plan that you presented is excellent in relation to public transport. There is a concern, however, on the funding stream. So what you've got in front of you is just recently, like 2 days ago, we put together a draft strategic plan. It took a bit longer than we hoped, but there it is. And I will just take you through. Sorry. Oh yes, and this is very much a draft. So if council has any things they would like extra in our goals, our mission, etc., then please let us know and we can incorporate that. So we are looking at how we fit in with your system, not necessarily criticising what you've got or commenting on what you've got. So under the vision, a pollution-free environment with efficient, accessible, sustainable, complementary, by complementary I mean complementary to the TDC, NCC e-bus system, travel in Nelson Tasman region, which benefits the people in our region. You can see our mission there, supporting affordable and accessible travel services, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, enhancing social connectedness, and promoting well-being. And it's just, I'm the treasurer, but a trustee, but occasionally when there's a shortage, like someone's got sick, I drive the bus. And it's just amazing when you drive the bus, the social connectivity that happens on the bus. People are chattering all the time. And sometimes people even make lifelong friendships on the bus, and they come to Nelson or to Richmond each week just to be on the bus so they can meet their friends. So the connectedness isn't just village connectedness, it's actually connectedness promoted by our bus service. So we have 5 broad operational goals: carbon emission reduction, support climate change initiatives, we have financial sustainability, we have organisational sustainability, enhance social connectedness and promote wellbeing, and honouring and incorporating Te Tiriti o Waitangi in our structure plan. We've got, they're the broad goals. We've actually gone through and looked at actions that we will be taking based on those broad goals. Now, I'm not going to go through them. I've sort of put them in the order that you might find most useful, but certainly if you want me to elaborate on any of the other ones, I can do so. So under goal 1, essentially, we are committed to helping people using the e-bus. We're not in competition with the e-bus. You know, we've had one of our members or a couple of people there in our marketing transport group, actually helping people get to the e-bus and getting on the e-bus, people who are using our service. We are looking at finding the gaps and closing them. We are looking at scoping out Tapawera, which you'll hear from Joe later on. Upper Moontree, we're currently scoping out. There are other regions like Rewalka and Hira that we've had contact with that we will scope out when the time comes. We've done lots of community surveys, public consultations, and the rest you can read for yourself. Under the financial sustainability, we really rely on council support, and we'll be applying for both the TDC and NCC in the long-term funding that's coming up soon. Essentially, we get almost half of our grants from TDC and the rest from other organisations or lotteries. We are well funded by lotteries and RATA. We're exploring new funding initiatives. We're also getting returns from passengers, not a lot because it is a subsidised service. We obviously are very careful in our revenues, our accounts, and so we get it audited every year. On the back of the page, I'm not going to go through those in great detail, but we are definitely looking at increasing passenger numbers. That's one of our goals, number 4. And we really would like to maintain access and advice and support from both councils, because we've had that in the past, as Elena mentioned, and it's been most valuable. In fact, the TDC, Drew Bryant, was very instrumental in setting this group up. Drivers are all police vetted, and let me just finish off there. We're not just a transport service. Our trust is actually, I believe, quite valuable. It's taken a long time to set up. We've got an effective trustee that works. We've got an effective administrator and transport and marketing coordinator, and a great funding stream. And we are encouraging other areas, as you hear this afternoon, to jump on board. We have direct link with eyesight and do all our bookings. Want to finish off with that? Okay. So any questions, any elaboration that you would like on what we've presented?
Thank you for your presentation. My question is about volunteer drivers, and how do you actually find volunteer drivers?
We just advertise for them. Our marketing, that's why we have to have a paid marketing coordinator, who's not cheap, of course, as you can probably imagine. a very capable person, and part of her role is to go around and recruit drivers. And honestly, once the drivers come on board the bus, they don't go away. They just really enjoy the community links that they get on the bus. And, you know, as I said, when I'm driving the bus and hearing the babble behind me of people talking about how things are happening, coming from a place like Sydney, that never happened on the bus. People got their newspaper out and they read and put their earphones on. But this bus service, it's exciting to be a bus driver, and they're all police vetted. And we people do retire from after a while, but not many people we've lost. It's quite amazing.
Thanks for the submission and thanks for coming in and speaking to it. We do appreciate that. Thank you. I'll just check that Mrs. Sandra Hadler isn't here. She hasn't confirmed she was speaking. If not, we'll go down the list and see if there's anyone else here that would like to speak now. So next we had David Sysons. David, would you be happy to speak now?
Oh, okay.
This was page 73, councillors. Welcome, David. As you've heard me say to others, 10 minutes, speak to your submission, highlight any main points. Bill will go at 8 minutes.
Thank you very much.
And then at 10.
Mr. Chairman. I'll just get this working. Here we go. I'm going to read it. I find it easier to read these things. I'm speaking on behalf of the Waimea Inlet Forum Working Group, and you'll have seen our submission, and thank you for the chance to speak to our submission or feedback on the Regional Land Transport Plan. The Waimea Inlet Forum works on behalf of the health and well-being of Waimea Inlet. Given that it's right alongside the busy urban area of Stoke and Richmond, we're very pleased that it still has high ecological values. It's of international importance for migratory bird species, and it's of national importance for several other endangered and threatened birds and plants. Most of the people living around the inlet want it to be kept in a good state and to restore the values that have already been degraded. Over 25,000 hours of volunteer effort have been spent in restoring its shorelines in the last 9 years. The main threats to the inlet are fine sediment washing in from forestry operations and urban land development during storms, and the contaminants that are continually getting in through the stormwater drains, mostly from busy roads. Both councils know this. They introduced the Nelson Tasman Land Development Manual in 2019. It's a mandatory document that sets minimum standards and guidance for network assets throughout the region and for activities affecting them, including maintenance and operations. Its stormwater section says that stormwater treatment is required for all stormwater runoff that originates from a high contaminant generating surface, including all state highways, arterial and principal roads, and busy collector roads. But little or nothing is being done to achieve this on our busiest roads. The intersection of Queen Street and Gladstone Road is probably the region's worst source of pollutants from vehicles, such as hydrocarbons, zinc, tyre rubber, and brake dust. All of these pollutants go straight down the Beach Road open drain and into the inlet. This has been known and recorded since at least 2010, and yet still nothing's been done about it. And since then, the amount of traffic and therefore the amount of pollution has just kept on going up and up. That may be the worst source, but the contaminants are getting into the inlet from all along the main road, right from Te Hunanui through to Hope. Nice sounding policy wording to say how the Regional Transport Committee will, and I quote, understand and monitor transport pollution to air and water and develop programs to address adverse effects. is useless unless it's followed up with action. And action has to be budgeted for. That's the purpose of the Regional Land Transport Plan. So we beg you, please allocate funding to actually do what your objective 6 says that you would do. It needs to be a line item with an adequate sum of money and a timeline for achieving it. And our other big concern is that the draft plan doesn't seem to be actually proposing anything to prepare for the effects of sea level rise and increased storms on the roads that run alongside Waimea Inlet. There's been lots of high-level government guidance on how to go about planning for it and about the need to do it in an environmentally sensitive way. So we also beg you to please establish a program and allocate funding to work out just how to respond to the pressures of sea level rise and increased storms. As with the stormwater treatment, it needs to be a line item with enough money and a timeline for achieving it. And it needs to make clear that the environment of the inlet won't suffer as a result. It's well known around the world that blocking the waves with hard protection is not the answer. You need to carefully work out how to build resilience by working with the forces of nature, not against them. And protection of environmental values, such as these two, needs to have its own measure and indicator in the section Outcome, Environmental Sustainability, at the bottom of page 45 of the plan. Thank you very much for listening to me. Please read our submission again after this hearing, and I'll be happy to answer any questions now.
Thank you, David. Do we have any questions? One from myself, just in relation to the contaminants running off the roads, have you got any sort of measure that you can measure that against what it would have been historically or traditionally back a few years?
Well, I've been relying particularly on the there's been stream monitoring is done regularly every 6 years or 3 years by Tasman District Council, I believe. I haven't got it directly in front of me, but I have been using the report that was written by Council Officer Jenny Easton in 2010, which outlined the big problems of Beach Road Drain and the fact that it's just never being addressed, and it carries on the same way now.
So we've got no sort of, other than that, recent data.
No, well, if there wasn't the source of pollution, presumably there wasn't the pollution.
Right. Yeah, no, it would just be interesting to see if there was some sort of measure, and maybe that's something we can look in the organisation.
Yes, maybe you could model what it was like before 1842 when there were no Pākehā around.
There might have been some natural soil type runoffs, but yeah, there certainly wouldn't have been, I wouldn't imagine, or not very much. Do we have any further questions? No. Oh, well, good. So thank you for coming in, and do appreciate that, David. Thank you. So continuing down the list, Emily McDonald. Nicola and Rachel. You're happy to go now with your Te Whare or Health New Zealand, as I understand it's now called? Yeah. So councillors, this is on page 131.
Ina koutou, ko Nicola Galzel, Tukuingoa. I work for the National Public Health Service Nelson Marlborough as a Health and All Policies Advisor. I have been in the role since June last year. And prior to this, I worked for local government, doing community development and regulatory roles for 16 years. On a personal note, I'm a regular cyclist to work from Atawhai to Richmond. I also have 2 primary school-aged daughters that enjoy active transport to school via bike and scooter. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Rachel Tokuingoa, and I'm a medical officer of health, public health medicine specialist, also with Health New Zealand, the National Public Health Service with Nicola. We're based in Richmond, just down the road, and we cover Te Tauihu, so Nelson Marlborough, including Tasman. So I've been a designated medical officer of health by the Director General for the last 12 years, 9 years, last 9 years, 7 years in Hawke's Bay and nearly 2 here in Te Tauihu. Just to follow on from Nicola, we're going to get into the submission in just a minute, but setting the scene here, I also am a cycle commuter between Stoke and Richmond. I think the cycleways are great. And I'm also a regular bus user, and I also think that buses in town are excellent. I also use the car occasionally, but that's usually when it rains, and it doesn't seem to rain very much around here recently.
Not lately, no.
So yeah, thank you very, very much for the opportunity to speak to our submission today. And we are here because, like local government, we have an interest in community wellbeing and the protection of population health. And we also have direct responsibilities under the Health Act. And as Medical Officer of Health, I have statutory responsibilities under the Health Act as well, and the Paiora Healthy Futures Act. Most people think that the health system is there for the treatment of disease, but public health as a component of the health system, we are at the top of the cliff. We are about maintaining well-being, improving, promoting and protecting people's health. So we aim to prevent people from getting sick in the first place. And so we really are here to ensure and enable healthy environments as well, and to make the healthy choices the easy choices for people. Transport's obviously a key determinant of health. In fact, it's one of the major ones. It's really important, as you've heard from previous speakers, for connection, social cohesion, but also access to education, employment and services such as healthcare. However, it can negatively impact, as you know, through road traffic injuries, deaths, air pollution, noise, physical inactivity, and through significant health impacts of climate change. On the other hand, active and public transport can bring about the greatest health benefits. Active transport increases physical activity, it improves mental health and reduces the risk of diseases such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes and cancer, some of our leading causes of health loss in Aotearoa. And public transport increases physical activity as it often requires travel on foot as part of the journey, and it also supports equity for the transport disadvantaged, the old, the young, disabled, Māori, socioeconomically deprived and rural. And last but not least, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from reduced car use will mitigate the worst impacts of climate change on the health of communities. And that's just in a nutshell. And many of this is included in the document, but we really want to emphasise those points. And I'll now pass to Nicola to talk into more detail.
We wish to take our submission as read and will focus on 4 key points from within it, which include 1, significant projects, 2, additional cycle infrastructure, 3, additional bus routes, and 4, public transport advertising guidelines. Our first key point relates to the list of significant projects outlined for Te Tauihu for the next 3 years, as covered on page 36 of the Regional Land Transport Plan. We support the projects that enhance road safety and invest in public transport infrastructure, such as preventative rockfall treatments along state highways and the development of the Millers Acre bus interchange, supporting public transport. As mentioned in our submission, we have particular interest in the Hope Bypass and recommend that a health impact or social impact assessment be carried out during the initial project stages. We've been in contact with Waka Kotahi about this and look forward to progressing the discussion. Our second key point relates to the need for additional cycle infrastructure and supporting travel demand measures such as parking and speed control. We strongly support the Council's goal of doubling the number of people walking and cycling within the next 10 years. Having high quality, direct and separated cycle networks, as outlined on page 25 of the Regional Land Transport Plan, will be important tools for achieving this goal. Our third key point relates to the Regional Public Transport Plan. We commend and support the councils with their progressive plans in making public transport accessible, sustainable, and a great alternative to single occupancy car usage. However, we recommend additional bus routes outlined under stage 2 of the Regional Public Transport Plan be brought forward to support greater uptake of public transport. These include additional weekend bus services on regional routes, increased peak hour frequencies on key urban routes, and supporting community transport options for Haira and Golden Bay. These additional services will work towards reducing transport disadvantage and respond to the common themes arising from the feedback received to date, outlined on page 37 of the Regional Public Transport Plan. Our fourth and final key point relates to a review of the public transport advertising guidelines. We realise this ultimately falls outside of the Regional Public Transport Plan, but wish to take this opportunity to encourage the councils to review the guidelines in the short term. We recommend that the guidelines ban the advertising of high saturated fat, salt or sugar products alongside alcohol advertising and advertising for alcohol-related events. Currently, static advertising or digital fixed advertising of unhealthy food products are banned within 300 metres of primary and intermediate schools. We encourage the committee to take this a step further and remove them in their entirety from buses and bus stops. This amendment would support better health outcomes for our community and our future generations. To finish, we encourage the councils to think about equity in these transport plans. Equity in transport will be achieved when we know that everyone has access to what they need to thrive. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to our submission today. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa. We're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Nicola and Rachel. Do we have any questions? Just one from myself, just in relation to particularly the Hope bypass. And in your submission, you've talked about reducing emissions, but and encouraging us to do that, which the Hope bypass potentially would do with the traffic moving faster and not falling along as it does now. But you're also concerned about the walking and cycling facilities might be surveyed by the proposed 4-lane highway. So I just wonder what's your priority there, really?
So we're hoping to work with Waka Kotahi. We've been in regular email conversation with them even within the last few days, as well as early this year. And we're keen to work with them on doing either a health impact or social impact assessment. I know that they already have tools that they do for assessing these sorts of projects, but yeah, we're keen to see if we can certainly have a strong health lens on it as well. And walking and cycling will be something that we'll be keen to look into, how the bypass will impact those facilities in the community.
Yeah, and I guess particularly from Tasman, we're also interested to hear how that will work in practice. So that's something that we'll be keeping an eye and lens on, as it sounds like you will be yourselves. Is there any further questions? I'm just looking at the screen to see if me and Nick has any. He is not, so thank you. Thank you for your very detailed submission and coming in and speaking it to this morning. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
And we're a little ahead of time, but we'll see if Emily and McDonald Federated Farmers, you're here and ready to proceed. Stephen, Sherry. Page 84, councillors. When you just just to open for you, there's 10 minutes speaking. A bell will go at 8 minutes, and then you want to leave a couple of minutes for questions. So a final bell will go at 10 minutes. So just wrap up after that.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm Sherry Chubb, the Golden Bay Federated Farmers President, and got Stephen Todd, the Nelson Federated Farmers President. And just for the records, Emily McDonald has moved on to bigger and better things, and we now have Natasha Burkett as their policy contact. We were a little disappointed by the very heavy urban focus in this report, and the apparent the missingness of the rural sector. And when you consider the productivity that Tasman relies on from the rural areas, and how heavily rural areas rely on being able to get services and goods to and from via the roading network, it does seem like a major oversight.
Yeah, feeding into that, I'd just like to highlight the rural roading needs really, and we rely on these to be well maintained. Without that, you know, the road users, our businesses have a lot of cost added to them, and we've quite frankly got enough costs and challenges along with council without having extra. So we'd just like to push that to make sure that all roading networks are maintained, and to see upgrades going forwards, because if we're standing still maintaining what we've got, essentially we're going backwards. We often can be sitting at home looking out the window, and you come to town and you often see projects going ahead up here, and we'd just like to see the same thing in our area as well, in the rural, and make sure that the rural's not forgotten about. And yeah, feeding into that's keeping the transport network efficient, with speed limits and that sort of thing. If speed limits are enforced or changed on rural roads and any mainstream roads, it adds costs to our businesses. Essentially any freight's charged by the hour, like trucks and that sort of thing, and the longer it takes them to get there, more it costs. And also feeds into when you're doing maintenance on roading networks, and that it's ultimately going to add costs to your business as well, or to the council. On top of that, the roading contractors that you have working for you is just making sure that they're fulfilling their contracts as well on the rural roading scene. And yeah, that's probably enough on that.
Yeah, interesting to hear the previous speakers highlighting equity. Living rurally, we don't have the same access to public transports. We are heavily reliant on the roading network. Any reductions in parking spaces or the availability of ease of transport to get people connected. It's not just their businesses, but it's their social lifeline to be able to access. We have elderly people that need to come to hospital for appointments. We have kids that need to come for orthodontic treatment. We have kids that need to come and play sports and what have you. That's just part of the inherent challenges living rurally, is that you build in, you know, an extra couple of hours on the end of any activity. And so anything that makes that more challenging and more difficult. Traditionally, when you come to town, you gather up all manner of jobs. So you're making the best use of the time that you've got. So anything that is adding to, somebody gave me the mental picture of, imagine coming to town and having to go to the hospital and do a hospital appointment, and then and if you had to get a bus and you've got to stop and buy some chook food on the way home, and you needed to get a car part, and you needed, it just becomes increasingly fraught for rural people to access the same level of goods, services, and that urban people might be able to pick and choose little bits here and there to make their lives easier. Often you're just gathering up a whole bunch of stuff and running around like a headless chook trying to get it done. The insidious problems with increasing challenges with the roading network is that anything that makes getting efficiently from A to B adds costs to our business, either through anybody that charges mileage, if the speed limits are reduced and it takes longer to get from A to B, it's the end user that pays for it. If animals on transport trucks, if it takes longer to get them from A to B, then there's scheduling issues and you're concerned about animal welfare, and there's other roll-on effects for things taking longer. We're really vulnerable to being able to get milk tankers in and out on a consistent basis. The Taka Hill is a high risk place. We need to be able to feel confidence that our bridges are resilient every time it's flooding and that the gravel buildup isn't chewing away at the embankments. And, there's a whole lot of holistic issues at play with rural roading. And it was just really disappointing to see such an urban focus. And I just would like to remind everybody how reliant rural people are on a functional roading system.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. As an example, we had a rockfall in the Mangles Valley. That would be a bit over a year ago now. It was the end of calving. And at the time, the rocks came down on the road. You could drive between them, but subsequently the road got shut for safety reasons. This might have been a Wednesday, Thursday. And then the road, essentially they decided that they weren't going to keep the road shut till Monday. And that was, I had a quick add up at the time and I forget the figures, but you're talking about basically it was hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of milk that were being dumped over the weekend, which quite frankly made my blood boil, all for the fact that someone didn't want to do a bit of work before the weekend and make people work through the weekends. And it was subsequently I kicked up enough fuss that it did get to the right people and it did get opened, and we thank the council for that when it got there. It's just a breakdown in the meantime, and it was a council engineer that just decided, and he said, why do you care? You still get paid for your milk, which sort of, really made my blood boil, and the fact that it still costs the dairy company milk. So, those, just making sure that resilient network is there and acted upon to keep things open rather than just shutting things and going home for the weekend. Anything?
No, I think
Is any questions there?
Thank you. You've got a question, Councillor Dowler?
Just the rural road resilience, something out your way, and I have a life sentence block which fronts onto a shingle road. My road gets graded 4 times a year. I'm just asking, do you think the routine maintenance levels on what you've got at the moment are up to speed and you're getting bang for buck? And I'm talking about present day, not the future. Just to get a vibe from you.
no, I think that only just, there's in Golden Bay, we're hugely vulnerable to big fluctuations in weather. So whether we get big storms or what have you, potholes are in a continual challenge. We'd love to see more roading sealed for just for the resilience, but we understand that the costs are quite prohibitive, especially when you break them down onto a per property rateable value. But as far as regular maintenance, it's fairly lean.
I would add to that and just say that our road recently has been good, but in the past it's been issues. Used to be really good.
Any further questions? Here's not. So thank you, Stephen, for coming, and Cherie travelling to speak to us this morning, and thank you for the submission. Do appreciate that. So thank you. And we will move on. I'll just see, is Bevan Woodward here? Joe, would you like to go next? I know it's a bit earlier than you originally scheduled, but we've made up quite a bit of time. Would you like to make your submission now? If you come to the table, councillors, this is on page 157. Joe at 10 minutes and Bill will go at 8, just to give you an indication.
Just like to thank the councillors and Stuart Bryant for your time. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
no trouble, thank you. Joe, I just wanted to clarify, are you making your submission as an individual or part of the earlier group, this one? Community?
As myself,
Okay, thank you.
but as a member of the.
Right, that, I thought there was some crossover.
Yeah.
So when you're ready, I think we're all ready. Mayor's.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. Thank you. I've put round a handout as supplement to my submission, and yeah, we'd just sort of like to spend 5 minutes on it and then questions, hopefully. I think in looking at the regional land transport plan, I think it's really important to look at the context and the Ministry of Transport's purpose and the outcomes framework they've got with the 5 outcomes. So we've got inclusive access, healthy and safe people, environmental sustainability, resilience and security, and then the last outcome is economic prosperity. And also the Land Transport Management Act that's asking for an effective, efficient and safe land transport system. And looking at the, and also you've got the Arataki 30-year plan, which is really sort of building on the Ministry of Transport outcomes framework. And so looking at the regional land transport plan that's out for consultation, to me, there's quite a lack of addressing inclusive access. And I come from Tapawera, you know, relatively small population, 2,000. We've got all the valleys and farmers. And we're not sort of really being included into what's been covered in this plan. And I sort of go into it in my submission. But in terms of public transport, it's great. And I really commend the councils for the e-bus system that's going out to Motueka and Wakefield and through Nelson Richmond. But it's not addressing anything for Tapawera. And it is really difficult to have a public transport system that is wider in the rural Tasman area. You're supporting the subsidised payments through to Golden Bay, which is great. But Tapawera is sort of missing out. And I highlight in terms of the work that the Nelson Tasman Community Transport Trust does that Bruno spoke to earlier. And I think also actually some of the work that they did in terms of piloting transport routes from Motueka and from Wakefield helped push forward a little bit, getting the e-buses going and seeing that demand for transport. And I think the trust plays quite a potentially plays quite a catalytic role in experimenting and trialing ways of addressing access and travel issues for us in this region. And so the first phase that the trust had, because I was involved with the trust early on in 2018 when it was set up, was really looking at Wakefield and looking at Motueka, Mapua. And we put Tapawera sort of on the side because it was in the too hard basket. There's not so many of us in Tapawera who, you know, as volunteers and so on, to sort of push forward initiatives. It's one of the poorer areas in the district. So now we're sort of coming on board for addressing Tapawera, and the trust has lent us the little bus, 6-seater bus that they've got, and we're going to start piloting a trial to Richmond and to Motueka. We're doing the preparatory work this month, and we'll be doing it from next month. And I'm not going to speak to it, but on the second page of the handout is just what we're putting in the Tapawera Informer, and it's sort of the update on what we're doing on the Tapawera trial in association with the Community Transport Trust, and very appreciative of Tasman's funding and support to the trust, and that it can be a catalytic thing. We trial it, we'll see what we can do. We've got Wadsworth out in Tapawera, the bus company. It would be great if we can have in the longer term a more formal public transport system that could go Kahatu Tapawera and doesn't rely on volunteers and volunteer drivers that the trust has. So focusing on where I think there's a bit of a lack on the inclusive access, the diagram that's on the front of the handout, there's various aspects. So one I've talked to is the Tapawera outlying area and the pilot, the trial that we'll do. Other ways of looking at inclusive access is the sort of intermodal emphasis and sort of going from bike to bus. And I've got a background. I worked for the University of Essex as their transport policy coordinator in the UK. And I've worked in transport for over 15 years. And I knew Barry and Stuart from being on the Regional Transport Committee for Tasman. So intermodal emphasis, it's not really there in the RLTP. And for instance, I went years ago to see Intercity, and I was on the Cycle Trails Trust, go and see Intercity, and the way that the buses in the region will carry bikes, it's with Intercity, it's a problem, you know, that I don't know if it's changed now, but then it was, well, we might be able to take it, and if we do, you'll have to dismantle it. It's not good enough. If we're going to promote domestic cycle to, you know, somebody wants to come up from Dunedin and they want to do the Great Taste Trail and they want to do the West Coast one and they want to do the Queen Charlotte, or it'd be great if we've got a bus system that works, that sort of facilitates joining the dots in people's sort of travel plans without having to get in their ute and go to places if we're looking at things through a climate change lens. Yeah, actually in that diagram, it's missed out the top and the bottom. So it's using a climate change lens is down at the bottom on the right, which I think is critical for our future generations. And if we're going to be good ancestors. And then the top is improving people's well-being and the livability of places, which is the purpose of the Ministry of Transport's stated purpose. And so the other thing, one of the other issues is in terms of group events and field days and people having a sort of easy to use matrix to do car sharing and trip sharing. If we're wanting to change mindsets for the future and change travel behavior, then that would be something that would be really helpful. And one of the easy sort of low hanging fruit for travel behavior and addressing, you know, we've got an increasing number of older people in our community, the retirement villages. What can we do for car sharing? There are some people there who could be good drivers. There's quite a lot of people who can't. They might, Somerset and Richmond's got e-charging. What's the scope for doing car sharing schemes? And I didn't acknowledge also all the e-vehicles that are happening in my submission, but that's something that's really growing on the e-bikes. Sorry, have I gone the 10 minutes? Anyway,
it's just 8.
Oh, 8. But I'll stop there. And then on my last page of the handout It's actually what I think I submitted for the midterm review of the Tasman Regional Land Transport Programme. I had a note to it, and that was in 2022. And I just thought that was worth putting in for your information, sort of looking at enabling safe, active travel in Tasman and the different elements. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Joe? Councillor Dowler?
Yeah, good to see you, Joe. It's been a while now, but I'm really excited about the bus service starting from Tabwera with the hybrid thing, and hopefully it picks up and takes off. Just a question: when I used to be the vehicle inspector out there, what he used to run a bus in the morning, he used to bring passengers in and freight, and then the same thing again later in the afternoon. Does he still do that, or is he?
No, I talked to Sue, and most of their trade is outside of Tapawera. You know, they're carrying people off the cruise ships, or it's doing other stuff. It's not really associated with Tapawera. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe just one to add that I didn't add is that in the Community Transport Trust budget for Tapawera, there is also a bike rack that we can put on the bus. So we're trying to do intermodal as well.
Just a question from myself, Joe, just in relation to the community bus, as Barry said, that's like a good initiative, but is it going to run so it will also meet the e-bus, or is it going to run directly to Richmond?
To start with, we'll run directly to Richmond. We're meeting, we've got a number of volunteer drivers who, and that's sort of word of mouth and putting out adverts to get them. So it depends on the volunteer drivers and what can work with them. So we want to do 1 day a week to Richmond, 1 day a week to Motueka. And if we've got, for us, it's a little bit difficult. Who's got a job in Wakefield? Who's willing to sit around in Wakefield? If they take them into Wakefield, maybe what we could do is, you know, once a month is somebody does the trip into Richmond, and then people come back on at the earlier time, but perhaps there's another driver who's willing to go in and pick people from Wakefield if they came out on a later bus. So that could meet hospital appointments or people who want to stay in for longer. It's sort of working it out.
Work in progress, really. Excellent. Appears there's no more questions, so thank you for the submission, and thank you for coming in and speaking to it this morning. That's appreciated.
Thank you.
I'll just check again. Bevan isn't here. Is Jacinda here? No. So what I think Bevan's not out there, Alec?
No.
I think what we'll do is we do have scheduled, well, if we include Bevan, 3 more speakers, but what I think we could do is break for tea now, and then see when we come back at 11:05 if there's anyone else here. Which should be, I'm pretty sure. I'm surprised that Bevan's not here actually. Yeah, maybe he's stuck in track. Oh, here he is. We'll hear Bevan since you can come straight to the table, Bevan.
Very good, thank you.
We were just ahead of schedule slightly, and so we've had one that was after you. So we'll have your submission, 10 minutes, and bell will go at 8. So you want some time for questions, and the final bell will go at 10. And then after that, we're breaking for tea. Morning tea.
Kia ora koutou, ko Bevan Woodward aho. Good morning,
sorry.
everyone.
Hang on a minute, mate. Bevan,
Sorry.
I'll just tell the councillors the number. The page. 152. Thank you, Rachel. 152. And we have had it. When you're ready, Bevan, my apologies.
Very good, no problem at all. Thank you for the time to present this morning. Bevan Woodward from Bicycle Nelson Bays. So I just rode out here this morning, and coming along some of the Railway Reserve and into Richmond, I just noticed the number of people walking, cycling, but also especially in mobility devices, people using those kind of frames to get around, or being on a electric type mobility device. And it's just so great to see. And that's the bigger picture of what we are about, in that whilst we focus on cycling, of course, to make all the active modes, including people using mobility devices and scooters of all ages and stages. And as we have an aging population, we just see it so important. And so that's one reason why I give up my time to do this. So thank you for hearing us out. We've done a brief submission. I think it's probably reasonably clear. The key points in our submission are that we cannot build our way out of congestion. In fact, when we build more roads, we induce traffic, and that means that we get more people driving. They drive more often, and they drive greater distances. So it's a triple whammy, and that's why it's just not possible to build your way out of congestion, and we haven't got the money to do it, despite the government's new draft GPS. The second point is the kind of projects that we want to see at the top of the regional land transport plan list. Is one, to reduce the amount of free parking. We believe this will actually also assist in the council's revenue for transport projects. We'd like to see the buses, which we really commend both councils on the initiatives that have been delivered. It's just fantastic to see. And so we'd like more, please. And so things like priority lanes at intersections in particular, getting the green signal, the green light, and also really bring forward this idea of park and ride. So the car parking in Tasman, so people from outer lying areas can drive, probably have free car parking for park and ride, and then enjoy a comfortable ride into town as they work on their laptops. And we also are very keen on 30 kilometres per hour, and you probably heard me speak before as to why we believe it's a magic number. It's happening all over the world, and we need to grab some of that because it just unlocks our streets. It gives people travel choice. It means kids can walk and cycle to school, and it means that drivers have less traffic to deal with. Often the initial reaction to a lower urban speed is that, oh, it will increase my travel time. But the key determinant of travel time is delay at intersections. And the urban speed of it itself, whether it's 30, whether it's 40, whether it's 50, really just doesn't make much difference. In peak time, it's the intersections that cause a problem. 30k means less traffic. That means less delay at intersections. And point number 3 was asking councils to look at longer term solutions, the bigger picture. And that's where we believe congestion charging is something we need to prepare for. The new government is committed to providing for congestion charging. We honestly believe, we're seeing the traffic in places like Tauranga and Queenstown. They're close to becoming basket cases, and we are probably similar. We need a solution. If we can address the equity issues, then congestion charging really has to be on the table. Just moving along, we really need to be thinking probably longer term about what to do regarding the port. I know it's a big question, but the reality is Port Nelson is with the rail link going into Whangarei port. Port Nelson will be the only port in New Zealand without a rail link, and that has huge consequences for the impacts on Richmond, on Nelson, and so forth. And we do struggle a little bit with the RLTP in that it reads more like a list of projects rather than an integrated systems-wide approach, which would look at things and set targets on greenhouse gas emissions, the actual mode share we want to achieve, accessibility maps. You know, how many people are within walking cycling distance of public transport? How many people have access to a safe walking cycling network? And so we would like to see more of a multimodal approach so we can improve mobility and accessibility whilst also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I would just raise a concern about the Hope bypass. One of the strategic priorities of the RLTP is to reduce emissions, but you'll see on page 36 that the Hope bypass gets the red box as in poor alignment, meaning it actually will increase emissions when we look at its impact on emissions. So, you know, these are things we have to grapple with. I appreciate the answers aren't always easy, and but we do come back to the need for really driving mode shift, if you'll excuse the pun. That pretty much wraps up my presentation, and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bevan. Do we have any questions? Councillor Dowler.
Yeah, thank you. Rapid transit between Nelson and Richmond is one of your points in your presentation. What do you mean by that?
Yes, so that would mean having a bus lane that provides the rapidness of the transit. Or it could mean longer term light rail, but I appreciate that's certainly not the flavour of the moment. So, but rapid transit would mean those priority lanes, and and perhaps some services as they currently do, providing the non-stop service, the connection.
So would you be liable for a T2 lane as well, like two people in the car and up?
Yeah, I look. Yeah, we've got to be willing to find good compromises. I mean, I'd probably push for a T3, but sure, I think that kind of thinking is great.
And just outside the box, where do you think the rail link, if it ever happened, and where would it go?
Yeah,
start, finish. Yeah,
good question. There was plans for a rail link to go under Walters Bluff and come out through at Dolores Bridge and then run through to Blenheim. And there were plans, of course, with what was proposed, well, what we had in the 50s. But I think you'd have the tunnel underneath Princess Drive, you know, from Wakatu Drive through to the port. And of course, the other big question that we sit with in Nelson is, which we refer to here, is if we don't sort it out, then it's going to put Southern Link back on the agenda, and that's a very controversial thing. It's going to be highly divisive, and I hope we don't go there.
Leave it there.
Thank you.
Question from myself, just in relation to your comments around. That's 8 minutes, isn't it, Rachel? Yeah, thank you. Just around the Hope bypass, just wondered what your thoughts around that were around provision for cycling and walking, if and when it goes ahead.
Yes. Firstly, and I hope that when councils make their submission on the draft GPS, they raise this, that the Minister has said that big new riding projects don't need to cater for walking and cycling, which of course is slightly horrifying that we might get a Hope bypass which doesn't cater for walking and cycling. So, but one would hope that we would have, with the Hope bypass, that the traffic environment that we get by putting in a high speed, say highway going over, under, around, that will provide local streets which can be calmed and treated And I think a big mistake we've made in Nelson is that as we've put in extra state highways and deviations and blah, blah, we haven't taken what was the old state highway and calmed it down and made it into more of an urban environment. We've left it as a reasonably high speed traffic arterial corridor.
Particularly remnant roads like Main Road Stoke can be a classic example.
Absolutely, really unpleasant to live on, and that's not fair on those residents.
Last question, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm sorry, I'm aware of time, so I'll be very quick. I'm just curious, we've heard mention of using T3 lanes for buses. I'm just curious, where would you suggest we put them? I mean, we've already heard today about issues regarding Rocks Road, about putting increased traffic onto other arterial routes, and you've mentioned the Southern Link. So where would you envisage these actual priority lanes going?
The priority lanes, I guess two options that spring to mind. One is that you use the car parking on either side and make the parking in the peak direction a clear way from certain times. So e.g. from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m, this car parking, you can't use it. And that will cause some pain. There'll be people who don't realise, don't read the sign, and they get their cars towed. The other option I've seen, they use it on Whangaparaoa Peninsula, is in the middle, can you believe? They have lights, and it's never aware of any head-on crashes, thank goodness. But I think you know what I mean, a tidal flow of that centre lane. And right now, we have pretty big flush mediums in the middle of these roads, which I think are a luxury. And places like Auckland, I know they're different to us, but they're removing the flush mediums because they know that that's not the priority. Cool.
Thank you, Bevan. Thank you for coming in and making the submission. Do appreciate that. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, off for a ride now, heading out to Spurs Tunnel.
So councillors will break for tea and come back at 11:15 a.m. Just for those that the tea room has now shifted from where it was previously. We're in the room next door. Those ready? Yeah. So we will continue on with the land transport plan and regional public transport hearing. And we've had a number of speakers, and now our next speaker is Jacinda Stevenson, Tahuna Beach Citizens Association. Councillors, so Paul, that I take it that's your group, but I'm not sure if you all want to come up to the tables or just who's. Okay, thank you. If you just introduce yourselves for the record, and councillors, the submission is on page 161. We have had the submission and read it. So 10 minutes, speak to it, and Bill will go at 8 minutes just to give you a warning, and if you want to allow any time for questions. And I understand you have a presentation, so that'll be appreciated. So just when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity. And this is on behalf of the Tahunanui Business and Citizens Association. My name is Jacinda or Jack Stevenson, and I'm the chair of the TBCA. And this is.
I'm John Gilbertson, deputy chair.
Thank you.
So this, as it just stays on. Yeah, great, thank you. So this is in relation to our submission, which was the end of February, to your regional long-term plan, the transport. Our aim is to improve accessibility and safety for all who live, work and play in our Tahunanui beachside community. State Highway 6 divides our community. We're asking please to prioritise the safety of Tahunanui users. The commerce of Tasman region travels to the port via State Highway 6. The transport system bisecting Tahunanui must allow people to travel safely and efficiently and allow our community to function. Where else do you have logging trucks and paddle boarders crossing using the same space? This is one example which is clearly visible, but everyday people are accessing essential health services or crossing, playing Russian roulette in an attempt to get to either school, work, or their homes. Freight growth to the port. The growth of throughput at Port Nelson is considered to contribute to the growth in the proportion of heavy vehicles on State Highway 6, Rocks Road to Hunanui Drive and Innisbrook Drive, from 5.8% in 2010 to 10.5% in 2019. This is directly taken out of the long-term plan. What is the projected increase for the period of this plan, the next 10 years? Why is there an absence of future growth predictions or an updated from the 2019 data? Introduction of high productivity motor vehicles, that the frequency of heavy freight is much higher. It is great to see the projected increase of primary industry production. We would like to reference in particular the aquaculture out of Tirakoe and Golden Bay. Production is tipped to climb from 8,000 tonnes annually to around 41,000 tonnes annually. That is a phenomenal increase of 412.5%. Much of this will be transported by road on State Highway 60. This is directly out of your report. This is the opportunity and moment to reinvest road user charges back into the region's road, continue support for the new e-bus service, continue support for walking and cycling, and investigate provision of smaller and lighter buses on the Port Hill routes. I'm just going to skip over the next one, other than a lovely photo of Paul. That's on Muritai Street. We asked for well over a year for that pedestrian crossing to be fixed, where there are children going to school that were falling over, having scraped knees, crying. So, yeah, we're fully aware of the need for more improvement. We are pleased to see, We are pleased to see that NZTA are in talks with local businesses in Te Hunanui about the installation of the much needed pedestrian refuge crossing, connecting the community that State Highway 6 dissects along the length of Te Hunanui and Innisbrook drives. And we look forward to this becoming a much awaited reality this year. We hope, Emma. We are surprised that no reference has been made that we are aware of for extra refuges on the waterfront, such as the popular swimming steps near Magazine Point, the Basin Reserve, near the restaurants in Wakefield Quay. This has been in the Nelson Future Access Plan, where I believe there's 7 crossing points that have been identified, and yet I'm not aware of anything in the short term that's happening. So hopefully we can have an update on that. These are very much overdue and much needed ASAP. We'd still like to see added signage introducing road users entering Te Hunanui from both the south and north. This will give road users the awareness of our communities and encourage appropriate behaviour. We would like to reinforce our strong opposition to State Highway 6 priority lanes at Te Hunanui Drive and Rocks Road, asking for them to be removed permanently from the Horizons activities in the long-term plan, from the Nelson Future Access Plan, and not just be put in the Horizons. We have huge support from a variety of modal and general road users who use State Highway 6, and we had a presentation that we did just prior to the 22 floods and then the election, local election that was, and had huge support from both the council and Mayor Rachel Reese and the current MP Rachel Boyett. A letter was sent to NZTA, which I've got a copy of, by Mayor Reese the week of the floods, and yet the community has not had an update or any direct conversation with NZTA since early 2022. An update would be greatly appreciated. While we understand the fiscal challenges for both local and central government, page 26, it is disappointing to see that Parkers Road State Highway 6 intersection has again been pushed back, despite being promised and planned now for over 20 years. Since the submission was made, the submission's closed. State Highway 6 Rocks Road shared pathway has been removed by the current government's list of major transport projects. We totally get this considering the exorbitant price tag and scope of works into the marine reserve. We propose a more fiscally and environmentally prudent approach. Our vision: retain and maintain the historic waterfront features, improve seating and sea access points, add pedestrian refuges as strategic crossing points, adjust car parking on both sides of State Highway 6, improve safety for users of mobility scooters, and merge the on-road cycling paths with footpaths at pinch points to the seaward side. Can I go back to that last picture? So currently, if there's two mobility users and mobility scooters coming from the opposite direction, one of them has to back up to allow the other person to get past, which I believe is totally unacceptable. Resilience of the Tahunanui community. We are increasingly warned about the likelihood of both greater frequency and severity of extreme weather events. The Tahunanui residents would like to see more attention paid to a resilience strategy that preserves safety for Hillside's residents, for access to both beach, shops, and for transport to and from the port. There is no reference to remediate of the hillside along State Highway 6 over the next 10-year period, as stated in this report. One of the major failings of State Highway 6 was the section collapse of the waterfront cliff, which was never finished as promised, causing huge distress and disruption to residents. Since this submission has been written, there has been another failing of that cliff face, and yet we find it very strange that there is absolutely no reference to resilient work along that waterfront. State Highway 6 is the lifeline between the port and the top of the south and the west coast, with all fuel distribution to Nelson, Tasman and the west coast. Surely this should be a priority. In conclusion, we appreciate the work that has gone into the Regional Land Transport Plan, and we appreciate that there is more relevant local information provided. We acknowledge that the Hope Bypass should be a priority, and we query the financial and environmental cost of the State Highway shared pathway. We have members of our community riding the same roading system as heavy vehicles, and while the e-bus system has been a good step forward, many people choose to be at one with nature when accessing Nelson City from Tahunanui beachside community. We agree that a resilient, fit-for-purpose transport system is vital for the continued health, well-being and prosperity of our Tahunanui beachside community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions of any.
Happy to.
Do we have any questions? Just in relation, I think it was at Rocks Road, you talked about adjusting the parking. What was that? What was your thought around?
Currently, there's two online bike lanes going from the south and north, accessing the city. And we believe if they are taken off the road and added to the pedestrian footpath to the seaward side and the curbing, I don't know the detailing of this, curbing moved out, then any parking outside that would then give cyclists a much safer access as well, because there'd be no chance of dooring.
Thank you. Mayor Smith, you have a question? You must be muted, Nick. We can't hear you.
COVID forever of being muted. My apologies for not being present to hear your submission. Just two quick questions. Do you long-term think the sustainable option for State Highway 6, our main state highway, in the long term is Rocks Road? And a more simple question, and that is, Whakakatahi is proposing a pedestrian island. Does that have your community support in that sort of commercial area at the intersection?
To the first question, that's a really hard one to answer. It does state in the Nelson Future Access Plan that the inland route is the prudent and climate resilient option, and they're keeping it there as a, you know, I don't know what the wording is to that.
As an option.
It's if there's a major earthquake or there is climate change and resilient issues, it is stated in the Nelson Future Exit Plan that the land route is kept. So yeah, I don't want to get into a conversation of saying Te Huranui against victory. We've had that before and it hasn't worked. I'm just advocating for the safety through Te Huranui. To your second question, Nick, I would say yes, we're more than open to any refuge crossing points which will provide safety for people crossing the road.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, Nick, what you say that they're proposing it? Whereabouts are they? What are they proposing?
Oh, I'm happy to take offline the discussion,
Okay.
but a pedestrian refuge in that area around the shops, in my view, seems quite urgent. And the points that you have made in the submission about your community feeling that they are putting their lives at risk every day the time they try and cross that busy road, I think is something of which we need to have both a short-term approach, such as refuges, as well as dealing with the long-term risks associated with the Rocks Road and State Highway 6. So we need to engage with you about the detail of the pedestrian refuge.
Yeah, I think Emma probably can answer that more. I know there's been discussions between different businesses along Te Huranui Drive and Innisbrook. My concern, Nick, would be that, sorry, I've got my back to you. We currently have a crossing point by the Med Lab just before Muritai Street. We have the crossing points at the lights, obviously, but we have no crossing points after Te Huranui School. I think it's about 1 kilometre, roughly, from Te Huranui School to the Innisbrook roundabout. That is urgently needed with you know, school students and residents trying to cross the road with absolutely no access to do it safely.
Understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you. Time's up, and I think we've run out of questions anyway. So thank you for coming in and making the submission and speaking to it, and appreciate your input. Thank you. Peter, while you're standing, you can come to the table. You're next, then last of our speakers for today. Welcome, councillors. This is on presentation and on page 173. Peter, it's 10 minutes and the bell will go at 8 minutes. So when you're ready.
Thank you. Starting with the public transport plan, please let me reiterate what a superb job the staff have done on the new e-bus service. It's an absolute credit to all involved, with remarkably few hiccups, other than having to have backup buses at peak times. We did mention some tweaks in our submission, but we won't go over them now. Today, I don't intend to go over the whole RLTP written submission, just teasing out a few points, making a few suggested changes. Mainly want to talk about the government policy statement on land transport. Firstly, you do not have to blindly follow the government GPS. It's a draft, which we hope will be changed, and in its final form be less extremist. But even if it doesn't, the fact that the regional land transport plans are supposedly obliged to give effect to the present government's GPS does not mean the minister can direct exactly what projects the National Land Transport Fund money goes into. Indeed, the transport group called Movement took NZTA to court last year over them not giving effect to the previous GPS and lost, with the ruling being that the GPS was only a guide, that it was phrased in high-level aspirational language rather than being a directive. Details are on the Movement's website. The fact that the new draft GPS openly acknowledges that it is not even attempting to look at what increased roading capacity will do for our climate change emissions should give pause for thought. Nelson City Council has declared a climate emergency, and all policies should be looked at through a climate change lens. This is particularly so for transport, which at a household level makes up 94% of our emissions. And 72% of Nelson's regional emissions and 36% of Tasman's regional emissions. Parts of the GPS are quite good in a perverse way in strictly separating out cycle and active mode transit infrastructure from road transport infrastructure. This hasn't happened in the past, e.g. the Wellington to Petone Sea Protection Project, which happened to have a cycle lane on top, but it was labelled a cycle project. And even though the cycle path was only a minor part of it, all the money came out of the cycling budget, I believe. Likewise, with the Rocks Road Shared Path project, the shared path is now only a small part of the project. A major part is the rebuild of the road and the seawall. And just as the current coalition government would happily suggest expanding roading capacity in the hope of reducing road congestion is most definitely a roading project, it appears they might struggle to agree that other projects that will actually reduce road congestion but aren't roading projects are, e.g. making active and public transport attractive options so there will be fewer people using the roads, making more space for those that have to or really want to drive. So we think that GPS is being incredibly naive or perhaps cognitively dissonant about thinking that you can road build your way out of congestion. All 5 of the places that Christopher Luxon referred to in this article on RNZ as having better roads, less congestion than Auckland, Netherlands, Switzerland, Hong Kong, Japan and Singapore, do so because they've made public and active transport so good that car commuting is no longer the most attractive option for most people. So we think there's still a good case for putting up active and public transport projects as a means of improving driving and at a much better benefit to cost ratio. We ask you to stay strong in the Rocks Road Shared Path project to keep it equal number 1. And essentially it's about resilience. We ask for it to be renamed the Rocks Road project and to be staged. And I didn't realise how much of this submission is going to be parallel with Tahuna Nui's previous submission. The first stage, making some immediate low-cost changes specified below that we can do this year. The second stage, building an inexpensive boardwalk outside the seawall. And the third stage, replacing the seawall and rebuilding the road foundations whilst keeping the boardwalk in operation. The blunderbuss solution advocated by Waka Kotahi of moving the seawall out to the edge of the shared path needs to be rejected as impractically expensive, difficult to gain consent, and for taking too long for anything to happen on the ground. In more detail, the first stage of the Rocks Road project would simply be raising the cycle path to the level of the footpath. Scarcely recognised in this country, but well used in places like Germany, this leverages the symbiotic relationship of having the walking paths and cycling paths up at the same level and adjacent to each other. Here, the combined width can be much less than the sum of 2 individual paths that you might need. All right. The adjacent path can be used for overtaking when there's nothing there. This is my son in Munich, and he's on a path that's only about 750 mil wide, but there's an adjacent walking path, so that if anybody wants to overtake him, there's no one on the cycle path, they can nip around. Likewise, on the walk path, if someone's chatting, they can nip onto the cycle path to overtake them. So just the effect of moving, as Tahuna people suggested, moving the on-road cycle path up to the level of the footpath makes a huge difference, and you can get away with a much narrower overall path than you would normally need. This intervention would work for 90% of the route, with some bespoke solutions needed at either end and in the middle, but nothing that would require anything other than minor roadworks. It would enable mobility scooters and strollers to pass without one of them having to go on the road. And there has been cases of mobility scooters actually driving on the road around Rocks Road, and we don't just think that's acceptable at all. And it would give an off-road cycle path from Tahuna to Wakefield Quay for cycling into town at least. Unlike Tahuna, we don't think you can just cadge from space from the landward side, because most of that cycle lane space, particularly, well, certainly when it's outside parked cars, is actually required for manoeuvring space for the cars anyway. So that space isn't, we can't really take that. But just by putting the curb where the white line is at the moment on the seaward side and backfilling that curb up to the footpath level, make a huge difference. The second stage would be a boardwalk from Tahuna Beach to the boat shed on the outside of the current sea wall. This would be a structure like the fishing platform, which performed very well in the cyclones Feta and Fahi and Gita. So this is a picture underneath it, directly after the cyclones, and this is it on top. So a few boards lifted, but nothing too major. And you know, if those boards had been screwed down rather than nailed, there might have been no damage at all. The boardwalk could and should be built as an esplanade, as the esplanade. Not only would the consent be easier to gain, because only a few legs would go down into the outstanding natural landscape rocks, instead of them being buried, but it would prevent wave splash onto the road, which is what actually closes the road now. The sea level at king tides is well below the level of the road. And this esplanade boardwalk could be built self-supporting a couple of metres from the seawall, allowing space for rebuilding the seawall at a later stage. This third stage would be rebuilding the seawall and road base, extending the boardwalk back to the new seawall. And once that is complete, a car parking or planted box buffer between the esplanade and moving traffic all the way from the beach to the boat shed, so that's increasing the parking around there heaps. And the esplanade's full 5 metre glory that would so transform the area would be realised. This is some of our modelling. We asked in the written submission for the Hope Bypass to be renamed. We now suggest calling it the Integrated Richmond Arterials Project, in recognition that the main issue is the arterials and how they intersect, rather than the need to bypass Hope. We are keen to work constructively for a fix, in particular for the Queen Street State Highway 6 intersection, that's cost effective and achievable in the very near term. We'll have a draft double lane roundabout plan out for discussion soon. Lastly, urban speed limits set to 30 kph on roads that don't have protected paths are an absolute crucial part of creating a cycle network to overlay the few separated cycle paths we do have. These 30 kph zones don't actually delay people in cars as much as you might think, as most of people's car travelling distance will be on 50 km/h roads just as they are now. But it makes a huge difference, not just to crash statistics, but perception of risk for those interested in trying biking for at least some of their trips, but petrified of being run over by a motor vehicle. To wrap up, kia kaha on your priorities for the draft RL2P, stay the course, keep the Rocks Road project as equal number one, but ensure that it can be staged and the first stage completed this calendar year. Be open to possibilities for the Integrated Richmond Arterials project, as it's not all about bypassing Hope, and keep 30 kph speed limits on non-arterials. Great job with the e-buses. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. You're happy to answer a question if there is any? He is not. You must have well covered your submission, so thank you. And that brings us to, I believe, to the end of our speakers for this morning. So thank you for those that have spoken. And we will move on in a few minutes to the next item, which is the submission on the draft government policy statement on land transport. Margaret and Alec, I think you're the reporting officer. Oh, right. In relation to the submissions, yeah. Would you be happy to move those recommendations? Councillor Dowler on the board. Do we have a seconder? Councillor O'Neill Stevens. Is there any discussion in relation to those? Councillor Butler.
Yeah, there are I just wanted to raise the point that the submission by Local Government New Zealand to the GPS was circulated quite late, and whether or not this committee wanted to support that submission, I don't know. So I know this is very late in the piece.
Oh, you mean their submission?
Their submission.
Right.
Their submission.
Officer's view? Alec, or-
Well, go on, Alec.
I mean, I'm not a voting member, so I can't.
Right.
Through the chair, I think that's a decision for the RTC to make in terms of whether they want to support that submission. If you guide us that that's something that you want us to do, then we can include that in our submission. We will take your guidance on that one.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the place to cover it when we discuss our submission, is that we could support the submission of local government New Zealand.
Indeed, if that's the direction that you choose to give us, yes.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, no, but I think we'll cover it in the other way. So just in relation to the current, Mayor Smith's my apology.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. My concern with the LGNZ submission, and where I would be cautious of amending the draft, is it puts a huge emphasis on increased investment in rail. And we have to understand as a community that every time the government puts $1 billion in rail, about 25 million of it comes from our road users for absolutely no benefit. So I would be cautious of that. The one area that I think we are understating in our submission is just how important and significant the Hope Bypass is. This is most recently costed as a $500 million project, and to give it some context, that's 2.5 times the cost of our colleagues with the Waimea Dam. It will be the largest infrastructure project ever embarked on until we're able to get the government to push on with the hospital. It has a massive impact on our community. Every single day I head out to events, Stuart, in your area, I can be held up from anything from 15 minutes to 30 minutes, and that is the experience of thousands and thousands of both Nelson and Tasman residents. So where I'd like us to go, Stuart, is that it is actually hugely significant that the government in the draft GPS has committed to a road of national significance status for that project that's lately priced at 496 million. It should be our first bullet point, and it should really, it's sort of like there's a few small bare issues in there in which it's buried. We want to get it right at the top and really emphasize, because it is just so significant for Nelson and Tasman. So my plea would be, 1, to put it first, and 2, to make the language a bit stronger and a bit more enthusiastic, because it is such a hugely significant strategic project for our region.
Thank you. I've just got a little bit out of order procedurally here. I haven't dealt with the resolutions relating to the submissions, and then we've moved into what I said would be the next item. I'm not disagreeing with that. I just want to get this tidied up procedurally. So, Rachel, can you bring back up the screens relating to this, the resolutions relating, which I think Barry had moved and Councillor O'Neill Stevens had seconded. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Now, if we go to what I think Mayor Smith was talking to, was the submission on the draft government policy, and Margaret, well, there's not so much you, mate, it's Reese and Alec by the look of it. Give us a report, which is on page 194, councillors. Who's leading here?
Yeah, I'd like to just say a few words before we get into this report. So, just wanted to note that in the delegations part of that report at the end, there was a key one of the powers that the RTC have missed off that. So I just wanted to minute the fact that this committee has the power to approve submissions to external bodies on policy documents likely to influence the content of the joint regional land transport plan. So I guess clearly, the draft GPS falls into that category. So that should have been in the back of the report. So I just wanted to highlight that minor omission from the report. And then I guess get into discussion on the draft that was circulated separate to this report via email, I think on Monday afternoon. We've received some feedback from some of the members of this committee, and some of that feedback was that we should have slightly stronger language within the submission, especially around the concern around the funding assistance rate for maintenance of footpaths and cycle paths, and also around Rocks Road. So I have made some minor changes which are up on the screen now, following that feedback, and I guess now open it up to the floor around the discussion on proven or otherwise the draft submission that's been tabled.
So we take Nick's comments previously as being part of this discussion.
Yes. So yeah, I guess we would pull that forward in order potentially. Could be something that we could do.
Yeah. Okay. Mayor Smith, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, my apologies. My Zoom does not allow me to see what's on the screen. Would it be possible for someone just to flick me an email of the rec that's on the screen if it has changed at all from that which is in the papers and documents that I have up on my other screen?
It's been emailed to you, Nick.
Thank you.
Is there some minor changes? Yeah. Okay, yeah. And that on next version, they'll be the same, underlined, the changes. Just in relation to the point that Councillor Butler made, which I think is a good point, but also the point that Mayor Smith made about the rail, I think we can use that to our advantage and highlight that we don't have rail. So that means the likes of the Hope bypass are more important because we don't have rail.
So through the chair, I agree with you. We could do that. And just leading on from Mayor Nick's comments. So what Mayor Nick has suggested is that the third bullet point under the items to support, we move that to the top. We make that slightly stronger, and in there we can perhaps add that comment that we don't have rail, and therefore this is even more important. So we can incorporate that in that bullet point.
And whether we want to, with that proviso, also support the local government New Zealand submission at the same point, again highlighting that we don't have rail. So that's something to consider as well.
Yes, you need to give us a little bit more guidance for consider. I think you need to tell us what you actually want to do this, that we can do those words accordingly.
I think Mayor Smith has got his hand up again, have you? Mayor Smith, have you?
I was suggesting just some extra words to pick up that point, and that would be just to add a bullet point in the end. The Nelson Tasman, we are broadly supportive of the LGNZ submission, albeit our region gets negligible benefit from rail, and believe this needs to be taken into account in prioritising other transport investments in our region.
Yep, that sounds good to me. Councillor Butler's nodding. General agreement around the table. Thank you. Yep. Any other points anyone else has? Had you covered off all you wanted to, officers? Alec and Rex?
Yes.
So, is everyone, I guess, has probably read the changes?
Sorry, through the chair, Emma's got a question.
Oh, Emma.
Sorry, it's not a question. Just a comment that Waka Day will be providing its own feedback through our board on the GPS. So I'll just record as abstaining on this matter. Thank you.
Right, any other comments or? Rohan? Yeah, Councillor O'Neill Stephens.
I guess just a broad one, which is I'm really supportive of all of the feedback we've got here. I guess the one thing that's maybe not reflected explicitly, sort of implicitly through all of the things we're giving feedback on, but the fact that if this GPS were to stay as it is, and that were to flow down through Waka Kotahi into our operations as well, that would be a incredibly significant shift in the way we're currently doing our transport operations. And whilst there'll be that back and forth around, as Peter Renshaw talked about in terms of the legal requirements and how much we have to adhere to the GPS, just on the surface, I think it's worth acknowledging how big a shift these funding lines changes are, and the feedback that we're giving is that a lot of the work that we're currently doing, I think there's a view here that it is worthy work to be doing, and that it is work that is supported by our community.
So yeah, are you saying that we should be supportive of those changes? Or indicate?
I'm just saying I think that not the one thing that's not captured, and I think it's hard to capture in this submission where we've been quite specific, but it is just that wider sense of how big a change this GPS is. But I don't think it's necessary to adjust our submission.
Right, okay. Because we still have a few days, don't we?
The submission is to go in 2nd of April. 2nd of April.
Okay. So, as previously agreed, you'll circulate it to all members, and Mayor Smith and myself will have final sign-off. Is that the plan?
That's correct. So what we will do is we will, following the resolution by the RTC, we will make those changes that you've given us guidance on. We'll recirculate that, and then it'll come to both of you for signature. Yes.
Right. John? No, not yet. I'm about to come to that. Unless anyone else wishes to speak. All right. So, do we have a resolution in relation to that? Probably way back on the agenda, is it? Just coming up now. Hopefully. Okay, so 3 is what I just talked about, but it will be circulated prior to that to all the committee members and the alternates.
Sorry, through the chair, I just think that needs to go a little bit further than that. So it's not just the amended table that was put in a table today, but as agreed to at this committee. Those changes we've just discussed. So the the addition of the reordering and the local government submission. So maybe we can just say as amended, and then the minutes can reflect what we've said.
Is that what you're working on now, Rachel? So just bear with Rachel for
Thanks,
Rachel. Rather. I don't know why I'm calling
Thanks,
you
Rachel.
Once that resolution comes, if we someone that's happy to move it, I'll wait anyway so you can see it. think you're getting there. I'm happy to move that from the chair. Do we have a seconder? Comfortable with that? We can just tidy that up if need be. Yeah. So that's moved myself, seconded by Councillor O'Neill Stevens. Is there any further discussion? If not, I will put the resolutions as one. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And just note that Emma did abstain from voting, please. So that brings us, does it, to the end of the open meeting. So now we need to move into in committee. So we need a mover and a seconder. Move Councillor O'Neill Stevens, seconded Councillor Dowler. All those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, carry. So we'll just give 5 minutes everyone to reposition and to get the Zoom sorted out. So